needs to be, I think, a provision that allows a negotiation to take place between our intelligence community and the telecommunications companies so that those records are retained. Because I don't want to let somebody fly planes into our buildings again because we overdo this. But the public has more confidence in the private sector retaining those records than they do in the federal government.
Congressman Steve King on this program just a few minutes ago talking about a legislative provision that would reform the Patriot Act in an effort to strike the proper balance between the rights of private citizens and legitimate intelligence needs. Congressman King's response comes as an appeals court finds the NSA's use of bulk collection of telephone records illegal. For more on this story, let's welcome in Clare Lopez, intelligence expert and Vice President for Research and Analysis for the Center for Security Policy. She's Skyping in from Washington, D.C. And from our Newsmax TV newsroom, we welcome Fred Rustmann, former CIA case officer and author of the book, The Case Officer. So Fred, you wrote the book, we might say, about the CIA. You know what the CIA is all about. How valuable is the surveillance, the bulk collection of these phone records that the National Security Agency was conducting?
Very, very valuable. In any investigation, probably the most important aspect of that is what we call connections. And with the collection of these this metadata, if we capture a terrorist anywhere in the world, one of the first things we want to know is what are his connections. And the best way to know his connections are who has he been in touch with, either via the internet or on telephone or texting or what have you. And that's where, when we sweep up all of these telephone numbers, the only time these are ever used is when we have to find connections. And by golly, I want to know who that terrorist has been talking to in the United States. That's the way we're going to keep our country safe.
Claire, we heard Congressman King talk about striking that balance. He was concerned about a repeat of 9/11. Is Steve King on the right trail in terms of making a legislative modification?
Yes, he certainly is. Congressman King understands these matters very well indeed. You know, as Fred just said, this is one of the most important tools in the toolkit, if you will, of the intelligence community. I mean, look at the incident we just had with Muslim terrorist jihadi gunmen down in Garland, Texas. And when we looked back and when law enforcement looked back, they found a whole trail of communications, this happening to be online and through social media, between one of those jihadi gunmen and Islamic State jihadis in various places around the world. Now, if they could have had that information before those gunmen went from Phoenix, Arizona to Garland, Texas, all the better.
Now, as we take a look, and of course, both the House and the Senate will be involved in reauthorization and perhaps a rewrite of the Patriot Act, it is worth noting what the U.S. Senate did today. They passed that Iran nuclear bill. In other words, to have a form of legislative check on whatever agreement comes up. It passed overwhelmingly. It's expected to go to the House next week. Fred, did the Senate make the right move?
Yeah, they did make the right move. We cannot, I think it was President Eisenhower back in 1947 who came out unequivocally and said, we cannot permit our enemies to have nuclear capability. We cannot do that. And it's the same today. We have to do everything in our power to make sure that they do not get a nuclear capability.
Your take on this, Claire, the U.S. Senate voting overwhelmingly to have some sort of check, the House expected to follow suit. What kind of reaction do you think this is going to draw from the administration? A begrudging affirmation or what?
I have to say that I take another view of this than Fred does. And the reason is that by passing this bill, and if the House follows suit, which they're very likely to do, what it's done is taken the constitutional prerogative of the Senate to provide advice and consent on treaties thrown out the complete definition of treaty in the first place and called this some kind of an executive agreement that's not legal and non-binding and I don't know what. And then instead of requiring that the president obtain a 2/3 majority vote in the Senate in order to affirm the agreement, the treaty, this puts the responsibility on the Senate to come up with a 2/3 vote to overturn, to reject the president's agreement, whatever that may turn out to be. Now, we may never get to an agreement. I'm not sure that we will. But this turns the constitutional provisions about making treaties completely on its head, and I think it's the wrong move completely.
Duly noted, a concern about really the constitutional role of the Senate in terms of treaty ratification. Fred, a final question from you. I'll cite a member of the United States Senate who I know pretty well. Senator John McCain said today that people seem to have forgotten 9/11. Would you agree with that?
I absolutely would agree with that. I think the basic problem here is after 9/11, the American people had a lot of faith in government. I don't think the American people have much faith in government anymore. So all of this metadata that's being held by the NSA, if we have faith that they're going to handle it properly, then we're in good shape. If we don't have faith that they're going to handle it properly, then we're in trouble.
And on that note, I will say thank you to both Fred Rustmann and Clare Lopez, and we'll continue to monitor this. You heard what these two intelligence experts have to say. What's your take? Send me your comments via email, Facebook, or on Twitter. We're coming back.